Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Psalms in Hebrew and Comparative Translations. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning, and we're going to be studying Psalm 21. Psalm 21 is a psalm. So, Psalm 20, which we did the last time we met a few weeks ago, is a psalm that I knew very well because the entirety of the psalm is contained the in the morning prayer service on weekdays. And not during the holiday of Hanukkah, which this is Hanukkah, right? We skip over it on days of mourning, Psalm 20. But on regular weekdays, days of celebration, we skip over it on days of celebration because Psalm 20 has such a serious aspect to it. Psalm 21 is almost absent completely from the Jewish liturgical tradition. And so I really learned it almost for the first time. I mean, I've read through the entire book of Psalms, but when you're reading through the entire book of Psalms, that's not the same as really getting into what the words mean. And the more that you say a psalm, the more that you repeat it, the more that you've memorized it, the more that it's a part of you. Same as song lyrics, same as poetry, right? The more depth your emotional connection to it is. So this psalm does feel a little more distant for me, but I'm hoping that by the end of this hour, we'll have really had an opportunity to engage with it and explore the ways we might use it in our spiritual practice, even if it isn't contained in our liturgical tradition. So we'll start as we usually start by reading the psalm out loud in Hebrew, and then some of our translations as well. So you can follow along on the page. Psalm 21. Lamenatseach mizmor leDavid. Adonai be'ozecha yismach melech, uvishuatecha ma yagel me'od. Ta'avat libo natata lo, va'areshet sifatav bal manata sela. Ki tikademenu birchot tov, tasim l'rosho ateret paz. Chaim sha'al mimecha, natata lo, orech yamim olam va'ed. Gadol kivodo bishuatecha, hod vehadar tishaveh alav, ki tishitehu v'rachot la'ad, tichadehu v'simcha et panecha. Ki hamelech boteach badonai, uvechesed elyon bal yimot. Timtza yadcha lechol oivecha yemincha timatzei sonecha. Tishitemo kitanur eish la'et panecha, Adonai be'apo yivaleim v'tochalem eish. Piryamo me'eretz te'abed v'zaram mibnei adam, ki natu alecha ra'ah chashivu mizima bal yuchalu. Ki tishitemo shechem b'meitarecha techonein al pneihem, Ruma Adonai be'uzecha, nashira nizamera gevuratecha. So we can read translation. Let's start with the revised JPS. That's the newest JPS translation with the 2023. For the leader, a psalm of David. O Eternal One, the King rejoices in your strength. How greatly he exults in your victory. You have granted him the desire of his heart, have not denied the request of his lips, Selah. You have proffered him blessings of good things, have set upon his head a crown of fine gold. He asked you for life, you granted it, a long life, everlasting. Great is his glory through your victory. You have endowed him with splendor and majesty. You have made him blessed forever, gladdened him with the joy of your presence. For the king trusts in God, though through the faithfulness of the Most High he will not be shaken. Your hand is equal to all your enemies. Your right hand overpowers your foes. You set them ablaze like a furnace when you show your presence. God in anger destroys them. Fire consumes them. You wipe their offspring from the earth, their issue from among humankind. For they schemed against you. They laid plans but could not succeed. For you make them turn back by your bows aimed at their face. Be exalted, O Eternal One, through your strength. We will sing and chant the praises of your mighty deeds. And let's read another translation. Let's do the contemporary English version, 1995, as a not a Jewish translation, but a contemporary, I think Protestant translation. The contemporary English version. A psalm by David for the music leader, thanking the Lord for victory. Our Lord, your mighty power makes the king glad, and he celebrates victories that you have given him. You did what he wanted most and never told him no. You truly blessed the king, and you placed on him a crown of finest gold. He asked to live a long time, and you promised him life that never ends. The king is highly honored. You have let him win victories that have made him famous. You have given him blessings that will last forever, and you have made him glad by being so near to him. Lord Most High, the king trusts you, and your kindness keeps him from defeat. With your mighty arm, Lord, you will strike down all of your hateful enemies. They will be destroyed by fire once you are here, and because of your anger, flames will swallow them. You will wipe their families from the earth, and they will disappear. All their plans to harm you will come to nothing. You will make them run away by shooting your arrows at their faces. Show your strength, Lord, so that we may sing and praise your power. So, my first question, of course, is in reading this psalm, what is the what emotions do you get? What is the immediate reaction to the content of the psalm? Yeah, Mark.
That he apparently won a victory and he's thanking the Lord for the Lord's help, because without God he couldn't have done it. And he's obviously, I think, looking forward to more victories in the future.
It's a triumphant psalm.
Yeah.
One that just exalts the Lord as well as the king. But it's triumphant in the sense that the king attributes all to God, and God responds to the king who had pleaded for or supplicated for the achievements that he had given him. And this is just praise, and says, your enemies will be destroyed and you will be victorious. You'll have life eternal, both here on earth as well as beyond.
My thinking was, this is very simplistic, that everything good goes to God, anything bad, the enemies suffer. And there's nothing in it that really speaks to any kind of action being taken by the king. I mean, yes, king does all the good stuff and gets rewarded, but it just seems too simple.
Gary.
A difference. I didn't bring the last one that we read with me, so I don't have it in front of me. But a difference, it seems to me, is that in this psalm, God actually seems to be doing the fighting as opposed to helping. It's what, there's this phrase, Adonai Tsebaot, and I've never quite understood what it meant, but I imagine that it meant something like this.
Nice. So the phrase Adonai Tsebaot, which means the Lord of hosts, or Adonai of armies, right? What does it mean for God to be a warrior God, right? May in reading this psalm, we get some insight into that aspect of the divine power. That this kind of triumphalism, triumphant psalm where God is described as actually fighting the battles and not just helping humans to fight them. That might get to this sense of what it means, Adonai Tzavot. Yeah, Larry.
Well, first, the startling thing about it is to completely give the credit to God, not to him at all. Here's the king, and he's saying, hey, that wasn't me. I've aligned myself somehow with God's purpose, and I've asked God to take part, do this. And so all that's happened is God. This is not me. My part was just to invoke God, to ask him in. And the totality, and it also has the eternal aspect to it, that this is what you always do, God, both on the positive side and on the negative side to evil. That when we can't do any of this stuff, but when we ask you, Lord, to step in, both now and eternally, and the king is not just me, it's the king to come, the Mashiach to come. All this is preordained. It's written by you, Lord, and we're just asking you to play the right track. We're encouraging, you feel like a cheerleader to God more than a participant, both on the good side, that your purposes will be accomplished, and those who try to thwart your purposes will be eliminated, not just spoken to harshly, they will be eliminated. There's a certainty and absolutism in here, both for now and for eternity. So I see it as a very powerful invocation of the plan of God that we pray for always being unfolded. And that's what's happened here and more to come. And it's David, because David is the present king. He's also, the line of David is what will be eternal.
Nice. So I think, right, one thing that's come up a couple of times in our conversation just now is that this psalm, it's hard to sort of feel what the timing of it is relative to like David's life, right? Because in a certain sense, this psalm it never mentions David explicitly except for in the superscription, right? Except for at the very beginning. It talks about the king, but not the Davidic king or the future king or the, right? It doesn't say Melech HaMashiach, right? It doesn't say the Messianic king. And yet it uses this interplay of time between sort of life now and life eternal, and presence of God now and presence of God eternal, and like glory and salvation now and glory and salvation eternal, that lets us interpret this psalm in a way that's sort of very much not tied to any particular time period. And as Larry pointed out, there's a very clear way to read this, that it's talking also about the Messianic age and the future kingdom of God, and the return of the Davidic monarchy, right? Now, I do wonder if the ease of that interpretation is part of why this psalm is left out of the Jewish liturgical tradition, right? I don't know for sure. I can't speak to that, but Psalms 21, and we're going to talk about 22 next week, definitely feel more synced up with a Christian approach to understanding the kingdom of God and the divine king than they do to at least a rabbinic Jewish approach. It's possible that a pre-rabbinic a Jewish person, an Israelite Jewish person, the author of this poem clearly had no problem with the phrases that it has, right? But there's also, it does say life eternal, but the Jewish tradition says that the Torah really doesn't really speak about life after death. There is no sense of sort of heaven or what happens after death, in at least in the rabbinic understanding of biblical texts. Obviously, there are some biblical texts like Daniel where it's very explicit. And this psalm seems hard not to assume that that's at least a possibility of what the psalmist was intending. And then I wonder, the rabbis who put together our Siddur didn't include those phrases in our Siddur. And what does that mean for us? Yeah, it's an interesting thought.
Rabbi, I have
Yeah.
no how should I say, no basis for even being able to discuss why it was left out of the Jewish liturgical service. But I see the psalm a little bit different than what has been said about the battles. I see the psalm here that the both King David and his relationship to God is that he had gained the victories. He achieved let's say triumphed over the enemies, but he never forgot the source of his power, and that is God. And so he attributes to God that his victories, but it's not that God fought for David, is that David fought with the platform or the background that God was with him, and he was expressing appreciation for that.
Great. So let's look at Rabbi Richard Levy's translation here for the conductor, a Psalm of David. Adonai, through your strength does a sovereign, or we could say does King David rejoice, and in your victory the king finds great joy. The desire of his heart you grant, the request of his lips you do not withhold. Selah. For you advance toward him with blessings of goodness, you place upon his head, meaning the head of the king, maybe King David, maybe a future king, maybe some other king that was the king at the time that this psalm was written, but then later gets attributed to David, right? We don't know. You placed upon his head a crown of gold. He asked life from you, you granted it to him, and length of days till eternity advances to fill all space. Okay, right? The King James Version right next to it says, he asked life of thee, and thou gavest him even length of days forever and ever. Right? What does length of days forever and ever mean? Is that a reference to an eternal soul, to a life after death? Does it just mean life until you die? Length of days till eternity advances to fill all space. What does that mean? Great is his glory. Through your victory, honor, and splendor you set upon him. For you place blessings on him forever. I lost my place. You delight him with joy in your presence. For the sovereign, King David, this other king, right? The sovereign trusts in Adonai. Through the covenantal love of the Most High, he will not stumble. Your hand, O earthly ruler, shall find all your enemies. Your right hand shall find out your foes. So here, Rabbi Levy makes explicit in verse 9 that it's the earthly king that is fighting the battle, not the heavenly king, right? But that's not necessarily obvious in the Hebrew, right? That is a choice in this translation. Your hand, O earthly ruler, shall find all your enemies. Your right hand shall find out your foes. Thou shalt make them like a furnace roaring with fire when your face says, your time is up. Adonai in anger will swallow them up. Fire shall devour them. Thou shalt rip out their fruit from the earth and their seed from the human race. For they inclined evil against you. They hatched a plot, and they will not prevail. For thou wilt shove their sharp shoulders before you. You will bear your bowstrings in their face. Be exalted, Adonai, in your strength. Let us sing songs and chant psalms, hailing your power. And Natalie, I saw your hand up. You have to unmute. You're still muted, so you have to unmute so that we can hear you.
Mute.
There you go.
There I am. I feel that when it says for all eternity, it doesn't mean the king. It means all the people who come after him. It's all the Jewish people will keep to this promise, not just one person. It's the Israelites who come in the future. That's the eternity. For eternally, your ancestors, or your future Israelites, will have life.
Nice. Natalie says, perfectly, an interpretation of that phrase that seems perfectly consistent with Jewish tradition, even with rabbinic Jewish tradition, with that doesn't fall into this trap of wondering, is this psalm talking about life after death? Is that when it says life forever and ever, it means a continuation of the seed of David, right? And it's reasonable to interpret it that way, because later on, in verse 11, right, when God is destroying, or the king, the human king, is destroying the evil ones, it says, and we're going to destroy their seed from among the children of men, right? Meaning, right, they not only will the wicked ones perish themselves, but they will not be able to propagate their wickedness into the future, right? They will not have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that will continue to be evil, or, and you can understand that both as the physical progeny, and also as the spiritual progeny, right? They're not only are the evil doers going to die, but also evil is going to die. And I think that when you read that, and then you say, okay, what life everlasting means is, that goodness and Judaism, and also the line of David, the literal progeny of King David, is going to last forever. I think that's a reasonable interpretation, right? Like, in the text itself, it seems like it's setting up this sort of duality between the righteous and the wicked, and the righteous are going to last forever and the wicked are going to perish, and that means, right, not have grandchildren. I think that's a reasonable understanding of the text.
My question is, Rabbi, what happened?
What happens? What?
I said, my question is, so what happened?
Well, I mean, it's a prayer. It's a poem. Obviously, there remains wickedness in the world, but we continue to pray for an end to wickedness, and that our own values do propagate into the future. Now, we do hope that. Yeah, Natalie, was that a fair restatement of what you said? I added the second half of the verse 11.
That was exactly what I meant. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mark, it ain't over till it's over.
I guess.
Right. Gary.
The description there about the fiery furnace and eating the results made me think a little bit about the descriptions of animal sacrifice. And so I wondered if that's kind of implied, that the animal sacrifice is, in a sense, a reflection of what is being described here.
Interesting. Something about that fiery furnace, that metaphor, sort of things being consumed by fire, reminds us of a sacrifice.
Also eaten.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. The fire shall devour them. Yeah. Larry.
It also, building on what you said, it almost seems like this is a description of a spiritual evolution, not just an evolution driven by the fittest, the strongest, the most able, but an evolution that's more of a pull rather than a push, a pull of the righteous, a pull of the moral rather than just the strong, and an elimination of the immoral. And that the earthly king, or whoever's speaking here, or at that level, his role is to destroy, not just to imprison the evil, but when they prove themselves evil, do them in, get rid of them. Just like when you moved into the promised land, he said, get rid of those people. If you leave them there, they will be a constant thorn in your side, and they will cause you to sin. And they never did get rid of them. Those things echo through eternity, sort of, at least at this point in eternity.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time on thinking about where this might fit into to David's life history. So one of the translations that I've brought is the Rabbi Shraga Silverstein's translation of Psalms, and his translation is very informed by the commentator Rashi. So instead of doing a straight translation, what does the text say? He does a translation that, what does Rashi say the text means? So when you read his translation, which we're going to do right now, you'll find that Rashi is very interested in how these Psalms connect to David's life. And so he even connects it with verses to the passages in the book of Samuel where King David's story is, so that you can really deeply feel connected to the way that this might be connected to King David's story. So, for the conductor, a Psalm of David. O Lord, in your strength shall the King David rejoice, and in your salvation how greatly shall he regale. You have given him the desire of his heart, and you certainly shall not withhold the petition of his lips. For before he even asked, you preceded him, that is his asking, with blessings of good. See Samuel 7:12. You have set upon his head a crown of gold. 2 Samuel 12:30. He asked life of you in fleeing from Eretz Yisrael before Saul. You gave it to him by returning him to Eretz Yisrael. Length of days to his kingdom forever. Right. So here, what does it mean that David asked life? It wasn't simply that David asked for length of days, right, long years, but that in fleeing from before Saul, that felt like a death. And David, in leaving the land of Israel, David felt like he was dying, and God gave him life by allowing him to return to the land of his ancestors, right? By allowing him to return to Eretz Yisrael. Length of days here, right? The forever and ever, that does that mean life eternal, life everlasting, and eternal soul, right? No, right? What it means, according to Rashi, is that the kingdom of David will last forever, right? That David's descendants will always be king. Great is his honor through your salvation. Grandeur and glory shall you set upon him, for you shall appoint him for blessings forever. You shall regale him in the joy of beholding your face. Now, here Rashi understands what is the joy of beholding God's face? That is referring to what happens after death in Gan Eden, right? That Gan Eden, paradise, Eden, right? That means either where you go after you die, or what happens when the messianic era comes and everybody comes back to life. That's like either one of those what does it mean to behold God's face? That's in paradise. For the king trusts in the Lord, in the loving kindness of the Most High shall not falter. Bring your hand i.e., your blows upon all your foes. Bring your right hand upon all of your haters. Make them like a fiery furnace at the time of your wrath. Let the Lord in his wrath swallow them up, and let fire consume them. Make their, that is Esav's, fruit go lost from the earth, and their seed from the sons of men. So here, Esav, according, right, Rashi understands Esav to be synonymous with Rome. Okay, so he means, I think, Christianity, and also, right, the Roman sort of empire. Make their fruit go lost from the earth, and their seeds from the son of men. For they, Titus and his cohorts, have plotted evil against you to kill you. They have devised a scheme that they cannot execute. For you will make them a portion to be divided among Israel. With your bowstrings you shall direct your arrows at their faces. Rise up, O Lord, in your might against those who rise against you, and we shall sing and chant your strength. Right, so here, right, Rashi understands this psalm as being very deeply connected, at least the first half, to David's life, and then he goes off on this completely different historical time period, right? Like King David was not fighting the Romans, so kind of a little bit of a confusing, like, not sure what Rashi was thinking here, and like is not, it doesn't have a clear, I wanted to have like some kind of a clear chronological approach, but no, right? Like for Rashi, who lives in Christian Europe at the time of the Crusades, right? The evil is Christianity that is represented by Rome. I think that's my understanding of what's going on here. But the Titus and his cohorts, that is so clearly Rome. That is very confusing.
It could be Rome at the time of Christ.
Right. Yep. Natalie. Nope. You were unmuted and then you muted. You have to unmute. There you go.
Okay. I don't want to argue with Rashi, but his idea, the idea of heaven is against everything I've ever learned about Judaism. We can't wait to heaven like the Christians do. We have to do all our good deeds right now, because when you're done, you're done. And I can't fathom changing all that thinking that I've had for 89 years and going to wait for a heaven to see God's face. I don't want that to happen.
Yeah, so I want to say two things to that, Natalie. The first is there is a strong voice in Judaism, especially in the 20th century Judaism in which you spend most of your life, right?
Yes.
Especially in a post-Holocaust Judaism that elevated the voices within Judaism that that were less focused on a hereafter and more focused on the here and now. That is deeply connected to a great ambivalence that Jewish people have had in the last 75 years, 80 years about like God and the existence of God, and in the face of how do you construct a theology post Holocaust? And it's not that those voices weren't there, right? That is to say, Judaism always was a more this worldly tradition than a next worldly tradition, and it's just that in a post Holocaust world, those voices were completely ascendant in our Jewish tradition. So the you're correct. The Judaism that you were raised in is a Judaism that rejects that we have to wait till Gan Eden to see God's presence, right? And even for those who were willing to talk about God in the 20th century in Jewish circles, they said the way that you see God is through, kindness and justice and that human actions living out God's desires in this world. And that is how you see God. There isn't like some kind of spiritual, next worldly, vision of God. So I think you're right. That is right. That is the Judaism that does like Rashi is the Judaism in which you were raised is sort of discontinuous with Rashi's claim here that we have to wait until after death to see God's face. And I do not think that Rashi's claim here is discontinuous with many other voices in Jewish tradition that believe that seeing God's face causes death. Right? That is a literal understanding of seeing God, of being too close to God's presence, is actually spiritually dangerous. And the only time that you could possibly survive that is after you've already died. And then that is to say, if there is one Jewish understanding of what Gan Eden is, one Jewish approach to what life eternal means, and it is a Jewish approach, is not the only Jewish approach. Your teachers who taught you also were Jewish voices who had a different approach to this. But there is a Jewish approach that says that that after death, your soul, your eternal soul, goes to paradise, to Gan Eden, and there is unified with the oneness of all creation, and which is the echad of Adonai, echad, right? That God's oneness encompasses also the spark of Godness within you, that is your soul, and that is an experience of union with God that can be metaphorically described as seeing God's face. And while I think a lot of contemporary Jews are really uncomfortable with that kind of language, it is not inconsistent with many voices in Jewish tradition that do believe that there is an eternal soul and life after death. And while we don't focus on it, I don't think we can say that it isn't there, right? It is a voice in our tradition. When people ask me, what do Jews believe about heaven and hell? I say, well, Judaism doesn't ever say one thing about anything, right? Judaism is a multivocal tradition that believes very powerfully that there isn't one truth with a capital T, but that multiplicity of truths are better at reflecting the divine infinity than one truth, right? And so there's a voice in Judaism that's very similar to the Christian heaven and hell, less sort of articulated in terms of 7 layers of heaven and 7 layers of hell, the rings, right? Like Dante, the Inferno, Paradiso, right? That's Christian. I completely agree with you, right? There isn't a lot of that sort of depth of description in Jewish tradition, but just the idea that, sinners are punished in hell and the righteous are unified with God in heaven. Like, if you just said that, there is a voice in Judaism that believes that. Most Jewish voices say that the punishment in hell lasts no longer than 1 year, 12 months. Okay, so like there are almost no voices in Judaism that imagine eternal damnation. That is very Christian, or at least not Jewish. The eternal damnation is not that is not a prevalent voice in Jewish tradition, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find a source for eternal damnation that wasn't cross-pollinated with Christians. That is to say that like it came into Judaism from association with Christian Europe. So I mean, not to say that isn't a completely legitimate way of getting beliefs, right? That's sort of syncretism, right? Some of that is just how religions develop. I don't want to stake my claim on some kind of pure Judaism that comes down without any influences of other things, right? That's not reality. Anyway, all of this to say, I completely am with you, right? Judaism is very much a here and now type tradition and not a hereafter type tradition. And there is a way to interpret this psalm and what it means that is completely ambivalent or agnostic with regard to the existence of a hereafter. But it is also possible to read this psalm and to say, no, there are several points in this psalm that seem to describe a possibility of life eternal, meaning life after death. Murray.
I don't want to get into interreligious, let's say, contest, but I was surprised to that the reading of a reference to Esau is to, let's say, Rome Christianity rather than Islam, which would be the natural evolution from the period of Esau and Noah and Jacob.
Yeah, so the rabbis understand Ishmael, Isaac's half-brother, to be the progenitor of Islam, and Esav, Jacob's twin, to be the progenitor of Rome, which then becomes Christianity. So when medieval Jews talk about Ishmael and Esav, they are doing so with an overtone of talking about Islam and Christianity. And I think so you're right to say that it makes sense that there should be a connection to Islam, and it is. Ishmael is the half brother that's Islam, and Esav is Rome, is Christianity. Yeah. All right, so let's look at this. So this is a poem that is used on the day before Rosh Hashanah in the penitential prayers, and it is one of the only liturgical connections in Jewish liturgical tradition to this psalm, and it contains a reference to this idea of life everlasting as meaning life after death. I wrote here, I do not think that was the intent of the psalmist, because like Natalie, I'm sort of the Torah doesn't really have a life after death, like, so I hedged that there. I don't know what the intent of the psalmist is, but it is absolutely the case that the liturgical poem is referring to it as meaning life eternal, life after death. So if I've given you, I translated this myself because I couldn't find a translation of it, and I think it's really beautiful. I've given you the first stanza and the 9th and 10th stanzas, and our connection is in the 9th stanza. I just wanted to you to see the amazing creativity of this psalm. So I mean of this piyut. So each one of the stanzas begins and ends with the word chayim, with life. And in the beginning, it's like a phrase, chayim arukim, chayim tovim, right? A long life, a good life, right? And then it rhymes. Each of the stanzas rhyme. Lakor, liskor, takor, ligol, mishol, ol, sheol, keretz, meretz, aret, right? So each of these lines rhyme. And the last psalm is the last line of the stanza that ends with chayim is a quote from Psalms. It's just an amazing. I wish I could like have the facility with with Bible and with Hebrew to be able to do this. So anyway, I thought it was a really cool structure, which is why I gave you. But here in this stanza, it says, "Life of goodness grant to your servants, redeem their souls." Okay, nafsham ligo, redeem their souls from seeing their grave, as the poet asked and received. Not so the wicked who broke the yoke. Death should come on them down to Sheol in life, right? And Yerdu Sheol Chaim is a quote from Psalm 55 that they should go down living to death, okay? Which is similar to how Korach was swallowed up and descended living to death. But when it says the poet asked and received for life, for redeeming their souls, that is a reference to our psalm, to King David, who, according to this poetic retelling, asked for life eternal and was granted it. So verse 14, the last verse of our psalm, Ruma Adonai Be'uzecha, is quoted in a lament, a song of sadness for the destruction of Jerusalem. Again, I couldn't find a translation of it, so I translated it myself. The fast of the 10th of Tevet, which is just in a few days, symbolizes the first of the series of events which led to the destruction of the first temple, the beginning of the siege of the Babylonians on Jerusalem. It's one of the most ancient minor public fast days. It's mentioned in the book of Jeremiah. We still fast on the 10th of Tevet. And here, this is a poem which is supposed to be read on the 10th of Tevet in the Eidoda Mizrach tradition. And here it says, Bachodesh Asiri Ze'ev Aravot al Ami Nohem, right? In the 10th month, a wolf of the desert came against my people. The wolf of the desert is a reference to Jeremiah 5:6. I'll show you that verse in a moment. On the 10th of the month, everyone who left the city was ripped, torn to pieces, which is reference both to Joseph, who was ripped and torn, whose coat was ripped and torn, and whose the brothers told their father that he was ripped and torn to pieces. It's also a riff on Jeremiah 5:6. This whole stanza is a retelling of Jeremiah 5:6. A leopard lies in wait by their towns. Their cities were destroyed by fire with great trouble. Be exalted, O Eternal One, through your strength. Crash the insolent to ruins. They feel deep shame when you do us a sign of goodness, the Holy One of Israel, God of hosts. That's a quote from Isaiah 47. But be exalted, O Eternal One, through your strength. Rum Adonai Be'uzecha. That's a quote from our psalm, Psalm 21, verse 14. And here's Jeremiah 5:6. Therefore, the lion of the forest strikes them down. The wolf of the desert ravages them. A leopard lies in wait by their towns. Whoever leaves them will be torn in pieces. For their transgressions are many, their rebellious acts unnumbered. So this is the only other liturgical connection to this psalm that I could find. I only found two, and they're both very, very. I mean, this one doesn't even have the verse in it. It's just referred to. It was in the note, but not actually written directly. And this one, where it is directly written, is only used one day a year in the Dota Mizrach tradition. That's not in our Ashkenazi Sidur. That's not in the tradition that we are inheritors of. Anyway, all of this to say, Psalm 21 not really in our liturgical tradition, but here are two almost instances. Rabbi Richard Levy says, is anger ever an appropriate emotion? If anger wells up inside us, it is essential to ask where it comes from and to try to deal with it. Is it the anger of envy, of resentment? Are we turning someone into an enemy who does not deserve that? The time may well have come to make peace. But if the anger wells up from a sense of injustice, and in a more rational moment we can demonstrate the nature of the injustice, then we, like the poet, may believe that we are embodying the anger of God. And we too need to say to the offending situations, your time is up. So what do you think of that read of this psalm? Richard Levy's spiritual read of this psalm.
Right on.
It does sort of change how we were discussing it, right? Like here's a description in the psalm of God's anger, the fiery furnace, and the rooting out the evil to the even to the seeds, and they're going to be completely wiped out. Is that ever okay for us to embody that anger? When we feel anger, is that righteous anger? Is it not righteous anger? How can we think about our right? So he's taking this psalm not necessarily about its triumphalism, but about how can we have our anger, but only activate our anger in righteous ways? It's just an interesting, I think it's a different read of the psalm, but maybe very spiritually meaningful. Yeah, Edith.
I've just been thinking for a couple of minutes now about the current situation and kind of feeling that I guess I get what the Israelis are trying to do in Gaza and feeling really upset because I see no way of rooting out the evil that is there. You can't get every single one and burn them in the fire or whatever it is that they're doing.
They do seem to be trying, though.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I'm just really upset and torn to pieces. But that's what I'm seeing in this is the reason for what's going on and seeing no solution. Because we can't get rid of all of the evil that we're seeing.
Yeah, it's not enough for the president of Penn to resign over foolish testimony on the Hill, right? Like that doesn't get rid of anti-Semitism. That's just a token, right? That's not enough. When we think about the evil that we see in the world, whether it's the evil of fundamentalist Islamic terrorism, as embodied by Hamas, or the evils of anti-Semitism, whatever evils we see, it's hard to imagine the possibility of actually destroying all evil, especially when we know that evil is not really spread through a biological, it's not really spread through genetics. I mean, I don't think we believe that evil is spread through genetics. It is possible that the psalmist believed that. I mean, the psalmist wouldn't have used the word genetics, but it is possible that the psalmist believed that evil comes from sort of a bad seed, right? From something inherent in a particular line of people, and I don't think we hold that truth, and so because of that, like the idea of just killing all the evil people, that doesn't solve the problem of evil. Natalie.
There's a beautiful song that says hate has to be learned, and everyone is born even, no hate, no love, and you have to learn to hate others.
Yeah, Larry.
This doesn't disagree with that at all. I think it's when you look at the seed, I think what they're saying is the culture nurtures it, and that it's passed down through learning. That there's a body which is greater than just the physical body, the culture itself. And if there's a culture of hatred, then it's very difficult to fix.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's why anti-Semitism is such an insidious thing, because it morphs. We hate the Jews because we have contempt for their powerlessness, and we also hate the Jews because we're afraid of their power.
This is a limited time for our discussion. We could spend the next couple of days on the topic, but I think we also could take put it in perspective that while evil cannot be destroyed completely, it can be brought under control, and that's a measure of victory as well.
Yeah, certainly, right? The Islamic State, ISIS, right, no longer has the power to be a governing body. While the ideas that they propagated might exist somewhere, they were completely undone by the war that the United States and allies fought against them. And maybe, as Marie said, undoing the possibility that Hamas can continue in governance, like, lays a groundwork for a possibility of some kind of future where there's less hatred taught. Let's close with a quote from the Ramban, who discusses in the Ramban's discussion of Abraham's death. He quotes our psalm. It says, "And Abraham breathed his last, dying at a good ripe age, old and contented, and he was gathered to his kin." So what does old and contented mean? It means that he witnessed the fulfillment of all the desires of his heart and was sated with all good things. In a similar sense is the verse written in connection with Isaac's life, "and full of days," which means that his soul was sated with days, that he had no desire that future days should bring something new. This is, as it is said of David, "and he died in a good old age, full of days, riches, and honor," right? Which is a quote from Chronicles. This is the story of the mercies of the Eternal toward righteous ones, and of their attribute of goodness, by virtue of which they do not desire luxuries, just as it is said of them, "Thou hast given him his heart's desire," which is a quote from our Psalm, Psalm 21. "Unlike other people, of whom it is written, a lover of money never has his fill of money." Right? So what does it mean to die old and contented? It means that you die with God having given you everything that you could have hoped for, not in terms of stuff, but your heart's desire, and that you didn't constantly want more, because constantly wanting more is a recipe for never getting it. But contentment comes from being happy with what you have, with what your heart's desire is. And that's a quote from our psalm. So may we all achieve that sense of fulfillment. That's right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week. Have a great rest of Hanukkah for those who celebrate. Today is the 5th day, and tonight we will light 6 candles. And our next class on Psalm 22 will be next week. And then we'll meet again on January 2nd to discuss Psalm 23, which is the most famous psalm in the book of Psalms.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon or good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Good morning. Good day.